Hey, what's going on there, guys? Nick here from Absolute MTG, and today we're going to be taking a look at Esper Control for the Theros season of Standard. So, Esper Control is basically like a greedier version of Blue-White Control, but we have the black added onto it, so it's Blue-White-Black, and of course it's also more expensive because we are splashing for a variety of different things that will ultimately allow us to do more with the deck. It allows us to have more threats and more answers for what our opponent's doing. So the entire deck list is down below where you guys can check it out. There's also a deck list via TappedOut.net in the description as well, where you guys can check that out and you can see all the cards. And if you scroll over the names of the cards, a little image will pop up and you can read in full detail what each card does if you're not familiar with anything. So, to get started, the first card that we have here is Aetherling. Aetherling is just a one of in the main board. I also have one more in the sideboard for the control matchups. Aetherling is fantastic up against decks that are generally a little bit slower. He is one of those grindy cards that you play him in the late game and you're really able to solidify wins very, very easily. The fact that it can make itself unblockable, it can also exile itself in the face of spot removal or board wipes or anything like that is fantastic. And it can also buff up its power or toughness as well, which if you buff up the power, it decreases the toughness and vice versa. So ultimately, Aetherling becomes one of the most resilient win conditions that you have in the deck if it's actually resolved and put onto the table. We have a playset of Jace, Architect of Thought. So Jace, Architect of Thought is really versatile in this type of a deck. It's a very utility-based planeswalker for us. The +1 is going to make creatures that our opponents have a lot smaller and much less threatening whenever they're attacking us by giving them a -1/-0 little setback. The -2 is going to be a mini factor fiction, allowing us to reveal the top 3 cards of our library. Our opponent is going to separate them into 2 piles. We get one of them, the other one goes to the bottom of our library. And the ultimate off of Jace is going to essentially be bribery for both players, where we get to look through our library, we get to put a card, and we get to play a card from our library, and we also get to play a card from our opponent's library as well, which is fantastic because generally we're going to go for the biggest and most threatening cards in both decks, and we're just going to smash the board with them. We have Elspeth, Sun's Champion, so Elspeth is going to either win by numbers or just win based off of like a few creatures that we're going to make huge off of the ultimate. So the +1 makes 3 1/1s. The -3 is going to destroy all creatures with power 4 or greater, and -7 gives us an emblem where creatures we control get +2/+2 and have flying, so making them very evasive. We have a playset of Azorius Charm, which is mainly going to be used to bounce creatures back to the top of our opponent's library. It can also give our creatures lifelink if it means giving the tokens made off of Elspeth lifelink so we can gain back a huge amount of life. That or Aetherling as well if we're hitting for like 8 off of Aetherling, and then we can give him lifelink as well. That's also great for Azorius Charm. Sometimes we'll cycle with Azorius Charm to draw a card, but usually we're going to keep back the Azorius Charm to be able to bounce back our opponent's creatures. And using it as a form of removal is absolutely perfect in this type of deck. We have Detention Sphere to be able to exile a variety of different permanents that our opponents have, whether it's like creatures, planeswalkers, anything like that. It answers a lot of different things. We have Cyclonic Rift, which can be used either for its regular casting cost or for the overload cost. Whenever we get to the 7 mana where we can overload it, Cyclonic Rift ends up being a perfect finisher or pseudo-finisher for us, where it can set back our opponent no matter what board state they're in. So the Cyclonic Rift, in a variety of different ways, it can be very helpful just to overcome different situations and different cards that our opponent's playing with. We also have 3 Dissolve, so the counter spells of our deck, so counter target spell and scry 1 for 3. We have 3 Heroes Downfall to be able to destroy target creature or planeswalker at an instant speed for 3 mana. We also have 2 Thoughtseize, which I originally at the start of the season wasn't playing in the main board, but Thoughtseize is pretty fine in the main board for this type of a deck. We get to see what our opponent has, we get to rip something out, and the only downside is that we lose 2 life off of it. So mainly up against like the aggro decks, we're going to be siding it out. We have 2 Divination, which allows us to draw 2 cards. We don't really have a dedicated way to be able to draw and then recur that and draw again like we had with Think Twice in the previous seasons, but Divination is probably the closest we can get to it. And at its sorcery speed, that's the only downside to it. but we do still get to draw 2 cards for 3 mana, which is just great on turn 3 if we can do nothing else. Like if we don't have removal or our opponent doesn't have anything worth removing, we can use Divination to draw more. We do have the 3 Sphinx's Revelation, which is pretty iconic with the blue-white control decks nowadays. We gain X amount of life and draw X amount of cards. We have Supreme Verdict to wipe the board. Can't be countered, destroys all creatures for 4 mana. And then for the land base of the deck, we have a playset of Watery Grave, playset of Hallowed Fountain, playset of Godless Shrine, so playset of each of the shocks that are in our colors. I have 4 Temple of Deceit and 3 Temple of Silence. And then for basics, I just have 4 islands and 4 plains. So we're basically going a little bit more heavy with just like the blue-white. Our black is more of a splash for cards like Hero's Downfall, Thoughtseize, Blood Baron, and like Doomblade. So for the sideboard of the deck, we have 2 Pithing Needle, 2 Negate, 3 Doomblade, 1 Aetherling, 2 Blood Baron, 2 Glare of Heresy, 1 Thoughtseize, 1 Jace Memory Adept, and 1 Sundering Growth. And probably the most unique thing in the sideboard is the Sundering Growth because it is a double white card for us. But the Sundering Growth is good up against decks that are running like a lot of enchantments or artifacts or both, where we can get rid of things like Detention Sphere, Underworld Connections, Whip of Erebos, things of that nature. We can also get rid of Pithing Needle as well, which is definitely fantastic whenever our opponent's naming high-value cards for us and we don't otherwise have a great way of dealing with it. Like using a Detention Sphere to get rid of a Pithing Needle usually isn't really the most efficient of trades that we can make for it, but Sundering Growth is great for that. We have Jace Memory Adept for the slower decks, like the mid-range and the control decks. It's an easy way to mill out our opponents. It's just another win condition for us. Thoughtseize for the slower decks as well, where we just get to rip a lot of the high-value cards that they have. Usually in the earlier turns is not going to be as valuable as it is in the later turns. So being able to see what our opponent has, if they have any responses to anything that we're doing, is usually pretty good with Thoughtseize. So we want to side more in. We have 2 the Glare of Heresy to be able to get rid of a lot of different things. Like it gets rid of Detention Sphere and Elspeth, but it also is going to get rid of creatures like Lexodon Smiter, which is great, so we don't have to waste like a Supreme Verdict just getting rid of 1 creature or something like that. That's also why we have Doomblade, so up against the creature-heavy decks, if we need more spot removal, Doomblade can side in, and it's great for 2 mana to just be able to kill something off really easily. The 2 Blood Baron are going to be up for mid-range decks. It's going to be up for control as well. Like anywhere where our opponent's using a lot of like blue or not blue, black or white removal or spells that they're going to be able to interact with our creatures, Blood Baron is going to be great. Also, if they're running like a lot of black or white creatures as well, the Blood Baron can make hits and not be blocked, or it can block any creatures that our opponents have, and ultimately we can just win the trade-off with that. The Aetherling, I think I mentioned before, was basically like for the mid-range and the control matchups. That's where you want another one. If your opponent gets rid of one of them somehow, you still have another one in your deck that you can use to solidify wins. We have the 2 Negates for the decks that are running a lot of non-creature spells, so like mid-range and control. And then Pithing Needle for any decks that are running like a lot of planeswalkers or creatures, or like even enchantments, things like Underworld Connections, anything that is going to give our opponent a lot of perpetual value and is going to be using like activated abilities. We're going to use the Pithing Needle and we're going to be able to name things. So in the case of like Underworld Connections, you of course can't name Underworld Connections, but you can still name the land that it's enchanting. So if your opponent's like enchanting a swamp with Underworld Connections, you can name Swamp with Pithing Needle, and then your opponent's not going to be able to use that activated ability that is not a mana ability. So the Pithing Needle is good for that. Planeswalkers, any other creatures that our opponent can get value out of. There aren't really a lot of them, but Planeswalkers are probably the biggest thing with Pithing Needle. That and Aetherling, if our opponent is able to resolve one before us and we have to deal with it, it's perfectly reasonable to use a Pithing Needle most times to shut down our opponents and then find a way to just smash them with something else. Even if it means like playing our own and not even being able to use the abilities, but still depriving our opponent of having another win condition that they could win off of. So that is basically our deck tech here. So like I mentioned, the entire deck list is down in the description below where you guys can check it out. There's also the deck list via TappedOut.net where you guys can check that out and scroll over the names of the cards and see what they do in full detail. And if you guys enjoyed this video, I would appreciate it if you like this video and subscribe to the channel for more Magic the Gathering content. Until next time, guys, peace out.